Cristian Blidario, que nos acompaña esta semana en muchas de nuestras clases como profesor visitante desde la Universidad de UT en Timisoara. Él es director del primer año de la Escuela de Arquitectura y también profesor de diseño y de teoría. Hemos tenido unos momentos sumamente agradables, reuniones sumamente productivas para hacer sinergias en todo lo que es la conformación y los sílabos de nuestra escuela. El día de hoy tendremos una conferencia a cargo de Cristian y nos acompañan docentes de nuestra escuela como la profe Magali Cava, nuestro director Jesús de Alessandro, Melissa Vargas, nuestro profesor bienvenido y como invitado especial para esta ocasión el profesor José Enrique del Monte. Los voy a dejar con Jesús, que les va a hacer una breve introducción. En lo que se nos acerca Jesús, les cuento que esta tarde, a las 6 de la tarde, tendremos la inauguración oficial de la Jornada de Identidad Cultural. Muchos de ustedes saben que hemos tenido ciertas actividades colaterales, como la que tuvimos el martes, y tendremos otras más. Así que los invito a que nos acompañen esta tarde, a las 6 de la tarde, aquí mismo en el auditorio. Se van a premiar personalidades importantes del arte en la República Dominicana. Así que bienvenidos todos.
Buen día a todos. Con ese aplauso damos inicio al evento de hoy. Yo quisiera pedirles que por favor se acerquen más aquí al frente del escenario, porque aquí se pone más romántico. Yo creo que es mucho más interesante que podamos socializar como si fuera una clase, un poco más íntima, aprovechando que tenemos un quórum muy íntimo el día de hoy. Miren, aquí está vacío. Vamos a ir llenando aquí, por favor. Vengan acá. No cojan miedo. Yo creo que es una buena oportunidad para involucrarse mucho más con la discusión, para anotar preguntas, para hacer comentarios, para hacer observaciones al final. Aquí hay la segunda fila está vacía, ¿eh? Para la gente VIP. ¿Quiénes son los que vienen aquí a la segunda? Bien, cuando hablamos de historia y de teoría, yo creo que hay una diferenciación importante que hacer que ayuda a que todos tengamos una mejor idea de qué abarca cada caso. Y es un poco, no es complicado, pero tampoco es tan sencillo, porque es algo que nos toca muy de cerca, es algo muy, muy íntimo. Yo no sé si ustedes conocen, yo les conté la historia de Sherlock Holmes y Watson. No se la conté. Una vez fueron a la montaña y les cogió la noche haciendo una investigación. Abrieron una casa de campaña, entraron y se acostaron a dormir. A las 4 de la mañana, Sherlock le da un codazo a Watson. Watson, despiértate. ¿Qué tú ves? Watson abre los ojos y dice, bueno, astronómicamente yo veo que existen millones de estrellas. Astrológicamente veo que Virgo está en qué sé yo dónde. Climatológicamente puedo notar que mañana va a ser un buen día porque las nubes están en una alineación fantástica de cirros. Pero ¿por qué, Sherlock? ¿Por qué tú me preguntas? Watson, idiota, nos robaron la casa de campaña. Cuando hablamos de historia y de teoría, hablamos de algo que está muy, muy cerca de nosotros. Mira, ya te reíste tarde. Pero ¿qué diferencia hay entre un campo y el otro? Si ustedes le preguntan a Friedrich Hegel, por ejemplo, él les hubiera dicho que la historia es el recuento del conflicto humano, de las posiciones encontradas entre las personas en una sociedad. Narramos ese recuento del conflicto humano, de la dialéctica humana, y eso es historia. Más adelante, un hegeliano llamado Karl Marx les hubiera añadido que la historia, aparte de eso, tiene que considerar la dinámica del capital. El materialismo histórico, decía Marx, es la forma de narrar objetivamente la historia, cómo la gente relacionada con la producción y el manejo del capital o la pérdida del mismo se maneja en el tiempo. Eso es historia, les hubiera dicho Marx. Pero esa narración de cómo las cosas transcurrieron todavía no explica la teoría. La teoría aborda algo que va más allá de la narración histórica. La teoría habla de cómo la forma de pensar en las diferentes etapas de los grupos humanos produce plástica. Eso se puede narrar en la historia, pero es del campo de la teoría. Como el zeitgeist, el espíritu del tiempo en cada generación, en cada sociedad, materializa. Como la gente que piensa de la forma que piensa en esta generación produce plástica a partir de su forma de pensar. Esa es teoría, y el recuento de las cosas, considerando causalidades históricas, es historia. Esa es un poco la diferencia. Luego pueden anotar sus preguntas si todavía tienen alguna inquietud, y al final podemos discutir un poco más sobre eso. Cristian nos viene a hablar de teoría y de una parte muy interesante que él va a explorar un poco con nosotros ahora, sobre la heterotopia. Vamos a ver cómo él define heterotopia y de pronto cuál es su caso de estudio para aprender de Cristian. Él ha estado también aprendiendo de nosotros en este proceso. Como decía Solange, hemos tenido un buen tiempo, muy buen tiempo, y me interesaría de nuevo que esa actitud acuciosa de cada estudiante, meticulosa, que observa, que busca tener un entendimiento comprensivo de la realidad, anote sus inquietudes y las pregunte al profesor Cristian, al profesor Del Monte, que tenemos también como destacado invitado en esta ocasión, que tendrá su intervención para complementar la visión que nos va a presentar Cristian también. Así que involúcrense. Ustedes están sentados ahí, pero sean parte de la discusión. Nos interesa muchísimo que ustedes sean parte de la discusión, que de pronto tengan la capacidad de abstraer lo que están viviendo y verlo desde afuera, que fue lo que no hizo Watson en la historia con Sherlock, de verlo desde afuera, de notar de pronto el pececito, cómo es su pecera. Para eso tiene que salirse y verla desde afuera. Así que quiero pedir un aplauso para Cristian y para el profesor Del Monte. Y sin más preámbulos, los dejo con Cristian. Tenemos una intervención de Melissa Vargas más adelante y que comience la acción.
Thank you, Jesus. First of all, I have to say that I will be speaking in English. I'm sorry, I don't speak any Spanish, so I hope everybody, and I'm quite sure everybody will understand me. I want to thank all the staff from UNIBE, from the architecture school. I had an excellent week so far, and I'm really glad I came. I hope my presentation will be interesting. I know I have tough competition from Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, so I have to be more interesting than that. I hope I will be able to be. And I thought of presenting you a project that has somehow defined my story as an architect, because I did this project immediately after I finished my university years. I was basically, I think, 24 when I worked on this project. It was my first major project, so in a way it's an experience that I learned a lot from, and by sharing this experience with you, I hope that you could learn some things, because what's interesting about this project is that I sort of understood it only looking in retrospect, like 5-6 years after it was finished, it was built. It took a long time to get built. We worked on it for, I think, almost 3 years to do the project itself. And then we needed another 3 years to build it, because it was built with EU funding, and we had to wait for some specific times to get all the finances and tenders done. So it took about 6 years to get built. And I think it was finished in 2010. We started in 2004 with this project. Now, I was not the main architect in this project, okay? I was, as I told you, I just finished school, and I was really lucky to work on it. The architect that was responsible, so the chief architect, was a former professor of mine. He was also very young. He was 32 at the time. I was 24, so he was younger than I am now. I'm 38, by the way, in case you wanted to know that. I'm sorry about this microphone. I'm not used to speaking such horrible things, so I hope I don't shout in it, because I cannot hear myself. So we were fairly young, and I wouldn't say inexperienced, but we wanted to prove ourselves. That was very important to us, to prove ourselves, to produce something that's meaningful, and to leave a mark on our city. Because this project is done in the city that I was born in, we were living at the time, and we still are. So it was very important to us to give something to the city that's important. And my professor, Marius, he had won this competition to design this place. And I had like a chance encounter with him because I met him on the street, and he asked me if I wanted to join him to work on this project because he knew that I was good at rendering. Okay, so I had a skill that he needed at the time. I was good at that. He knew me from school. I was good at rendering. I was good at modeling. He was not working on computers back then. He was just drawing, drafting, and he needed people that could render stuff. So he said, Christian, why won't you join my team? Because we have this cool project. Let's work on it together. Okay, I said, wow, incredible. Like, lucky me, because I was just walking down the street. And this is, I swear to God, this is how it happened, okay? So, okay, I joined the team. There was like me and 2 other colleagues of mine and Marius, who was the chief architect. And we had to come up with some ideas on what he had thought of for this project. Now, why I'm telling you this? It's because, first of all, I think it's important to know that in life, as an architect, you need a bit of luck, as I just had at that moment. And first of all, you need a skill. So you need to have like your skill that you're really good at and that people know you for, because people will need you. If you have a good skill, people will need you, okay? And I had that skill at the moment. So that's why I was part of the team in the first place. But that skill turned into something completely different because, okay, I was not only good at rendering and modeling, and I was also, I wanted to prove myself also as an architect. So I wanted to do the project as much as I could out of it. So what Marius did was he said, okay, look, we have this old fortress. Everybody knows it. I will present it in a minute, but I just have to make the introduction so that you understand where I'm going. And he had some drawings, and he said, could you put this on a computer and see how it looks? And then the first sketches for this is how it looks from the top, okay? So just to have an idea. The first sketches for this were this, okay? This was done like in 15 minutes, okay? He had some sketches and we thought of, why don't we make like a topography out of this square? It was probably, you could say it's naive and not very mature, and we were just experimenting to see how it looked. But then we got this idea of creating a space that's playful, because what our problem is, and you don't have this issue here because you have a bit of a relief, you have a topography with the city, you have high points and low points, but our city is very flat, so we have no topography. So we wanted to create a space that's playful and that works with the terrain, okay, that has high points and low points. And we thought this through, we made these sketches, they developed into something like this. These were like the final renderings at that time. You have to bear in mind that these were done like 2005, so a long time ago, okay? And this was like the final rendering of the place. So what is this place? This is part of a fortress that was surrounding our, let's say, colonial city, because we also had like a colonial city that was built by the Austrian Empire when they got this part of the land from the Turks during the war. So they destroyed the whole ancient city and they rebuilt it in an Austrian way, and they surrounded it with fortresses. And I can show you some maps just to have an idea very quickly, if my mouse would work. So this is how it looked, okay, in Austrian times. And let me just show you where our building is. Here is our building. This is the old center. It's still preserved like this. It has 3 main squares. One is here, one is here, and one is here. There's other squares now. But sometime in the beginning of the century, they decided to tear down all these fortifications because there was no use for them anymore. So they decided to destroy everything and to turn it into a green area. So just to have an idea, let me get the pointer because it's much easier with this one. I think. Yeah. So this is the Turkish town, okay? When the Austrians won the city back, they destroyed the whole the whole city. It was completely razed to the ground. And then they started in the 17th century to rebuild it as a fortified town. They used the Cartesian layout, so everything was orderly placed, as the Austrians did with all their new cities. And that's why I'm saying it looks like a colonial city in many respects. Okay, I have to decide if it's the mouse or this one. I guess it's this one. And yeah, you saw this image. So this is our building here. They tore down everything. All around the city was destroyed. Everything. There's just some little parts that have remained here and here, the old castle. Okay, let's go forward. And what's interesting about our town is that because it was so heavily fortified, here you see the fortification, it actually grew on the outskirts with satellite cities, which in their turn had their own central squares, their own communities, even their own ethnic groups, you could say. So there was one city here, another city here. This was the only city that had its medieval structure intact because it was not touched by the Austrians. And once they tore down all of these fortifications and the city grew towards its center, in the end it looked like this. This is an image from today. As you can see, all this green area, or almost all of it, was where the old fortification used to be. What's left is a little tiny bit here, which is our building. Okay, so this is how it looks from the air. It's not much. The building was refurbished in the 60s for the first time. That's when they opened this circulation for cars through it, which is not a very nice thing to have. Unfortunately, it's still there, even though we tried to take it out, but the city has such big problems with traffic that they just couldn't take all this traffic to another direction, so they had to keep it in. The idea is the following. It had a square which was closed with a fence. The square was not very nice. Nothing was happening in it, really. And then all these spaces were being rented by the town hall to different businesses. But in time, these businesses actually destroyed the whole building. And not only that, but it had another major problem, which is, I think, a bit later as a slide. It had a lot of vegetation on top, because these fortifications were built with earth. So they had like parks on top of them. I have to say that when we worked on this project, and it was for the first time that I went up there to see how it looked, it was completely different. It was like going into another world, because you were in a park on top of the city, and it was something that none of us could have expected as an image and as an atmosphere. So that was really nice. Unfortunately, we had to take it all down because the roots of all these trees were actually going through the walls of the structure, and they were destroying, they were tearing apart the building. So we had to clear all the vegetation. So now it's without any trees or vegetation on top of it. Okay, let's go back. So this is what we did. What we thought of doing was to create a space, that would somehow unify this whole courtyard and take out all the cars. We were naive enough to think that they would actually move the cars on another boulevard, which didn't happen in the end. So we thought that how cool would it be to have like a courtyard filled with events? And now, here we come to the important part, because the financing for this project was coming from the EU. We were not a part of the EU back then, but everybody knew that we would eventually join. So there were programs from the EU that would help us prepare for our future membership. So they gave money to Romania back then so that it developed its touristic infrastructure, its cultural infrastructure. You had to use the money on certain conditions. For example, in this case, they awarded the financing, but the condition was that for 5 years, you could have only cultural spaces inside the building. So nothing that generates profit, which is really interesting because the whole building was a place for profit. all the tenants were actually generating money for the town hall, and that was a problem. And as I will tell you later, they found a loophole so that they could somehow cheat this requirement from the EU, which is really sad in my opinion. So we thought of having this square, and the model that we looked at was something that almost all of my fellow people from Timișoara know, because it's in Vienna, so it's really close. Okay, it's this square. I don't know if you're familiar with it or have seen it in pictures before. This is the square of the Museumsquartier in Vienna. This was done like only a few years before our project, so that was fairly new. And it was a model that everybody liked in Vienna, and everybody in Timișoara likes, because it's a quarter that's built, as its name says, for museums. So what you have, what you have here is the Museum of Modern Art, and opposite to it, on the side where from this picture is being taken, is a museum that houses the large collection of Secession art and turning of the century art, Viennese art. And all the buildings here are museums and cultural centers, architecture centers. It's awesome, I have to say. It's a great place. But what we didn't know at the time was that when they opened this place, it was not working, actually. It was a huge fiasco for Vienna. And there is one particular reason, and we learned it pretty late, actually only a few years ago, by talking with some Viennese architects. And the thing is that the square that they built was looking like this. Now, what do you notice in this picture? Sorry? No people. Why? Why is that? What do you think that is? No trees, okay. It's very mineral. There's no places to sit, are there? Like, where can you sit there? What can you do in that courtyard? There's nothing to do, actually. You just go inside the buildings, and that's a space that's for transit, okay? And they realized that after only, it took them 2 years to realize it, actually. That's funny. In Austria, they have these same problems. Like, they have to think things through, you know, they do a project, then they realize it fails, and okay, what's going on here? What did we do wrong? So then what they did was they had a contest to reorganize the square. Wait a minute, it's going back. And they did this. They did this bench, which is now famous for Vienna. This is a brand for Vienna, this bench. You can actually buy it. There are benches like this in Timișoara. There is a club in Timișoara that has bought benches from the MQ, because that's how this area is called. And that club in Timișoara is famous because it has benches from the MQ. People go there for the benches, okay? And these benches are very versatile, because you can arrange them as you want. Like, they're really light, they're made of plastic. You can put them anywhere in space. For example, if we were to go there now, we could organize our that space as we wanted. And as you can see, since they put in the benches, this square is constantly full of people that go there to eat, to read, to just meet. It's one of the best places in Vienna to hang out and meet other people, okay? And this was done only through a minor intervention by putting in these benches. Now, you have to know that when we did our project, these benches were already there. So we didn't know the story of how it failed before without having any benches. We had no idea about that. We knew this space with the benches. So what we thought was like, wow, let's do like a space that works in a similar way, that's cool, with places where you can sit, and that it's very versatile and not flat. So that's why we wanted to create that topography. And I would say that this was our major inspiration. Okay, now let me see where I should go. So all these lines actually represent the topography that we imagine. The green dots obviously represent the green area. We also wanted to preserve the trees. Sorry? We also wanted to preserve the trees. There were some trees here, and this is a huge story. that I will show you with a different square immediately, because they cut down the trees while they were building the whole thing. So they didn't ask anybody, they just cut the trees down. And somehow that made the project poorer, in our opinion. So now it's without trees, all the trees are new. So this is how it looked. Of course, we did lots of surveys. We had a very big team, as I told you, 3 years of surveying, of producing paperwork for the EU, of making the project. I will not go through that because it is not very interesting. I have to say I was not part of the entire process. I worked on the project only when they did the conceptual studies, so I was no longer a part of the team where they did the technical project. I was still working with the same architect, but I was working on a different project. But the building itself had a lot of problems. Like, you probably know this type of degradations, like they had lots of things that were not properly thought out, like installations, like microbiological attack on all surfaces. They had it was horrible. Like, even look at this type of window. Like, nobody was taking care of the place. Nobody was telling the tenants what to do and what not to do. So they were just putting in things as they wanted without any regulation, which was horrible because the building was practically being destroyed. So for us, it was a good chance to stop this and to try to give it a unitary feel and to have some rules in the space. Okay. So then the site started. That was really interesting. There were two, actually there were two types of works. The restoration works that were carried on historical buildings. And then there was the new square. That was, actually there were two teams designing. One was working solely on the square, and one was working only on the historical buildings. And this is how it looked when it was over. These pictures are intentional without people, because you know how architects like to take photos of places without people. But of course, architecture and life is not like that, but we learned that later. So it looked like a really pristine object, and we are really, really proud of how it turned out. Everybody that worked on the project, it was something that was very different at the time for our town. We thought that it would be a success and couldn't stop bragging about it. It was incredible for us when it was finished. This whole area would should have been a cultural cafe, and it should have terraces outside, and also all around should be galleries and designer shops. And so we thought that the tenants would be mainly producers from the cultural field, like the creative society would just move in here and make this place awesome. And the thing is that didn't happen, okay? And that's why it was like a huge disappointment, because in 1 or 2 years we realized it was complete failure regarding this, okay? And I will tell you why immediately. So these are some other images. What we did, we opened some crossings through the building. So because the courtyard was not connected with the outside, so we opened some crossings from one street to another. So it's really interesting because it's like a labyrinth. You can walk through it like a portal from different parts of the city. And this is the inside. This is a picture from the big building, where right now it's probably the only building that has cultural activities right now, because they have exhibitions here and all sorts of festivals. And they usually do it in this attic, which is really nice as an architecture. So you come through this stair and you reach this point, and it's very long, and you can do exhibition and all sorts of things up here. So it's a space that's actually working, probably the only one that's working. And here are the crossings that I tell you about. You actually go through the building. It's very complicated. What we did was we changed all these elements, the details. We actually had the artists that were doing like Aquaforte, like the plates in copper. representing the history of the place. So we were very careful to certain details that we thought were important. All this area that you see with decking should have been a terrace, so all the tenants would actually bring out their work or have a terrace to meet with their clients or to have even cafes or whatever. And this didn't happen. This is an image at night and an image from above. So what we wanted to do was to create a space of play. And of course you see there, third space or second space, live space or conceive space. So what is that, okay? Well, I didn't know back then what that meant. I had to study to understand how we fail. So I started reading at a certain point in my life, working for my PhD, and as I was reading, I realized how we created heterotopia, as the title said. And I will come to that in a minute. But first, I want to show you how the space actually turned out in the end. The first thing that happened, and that was shocking to me, was that immediately as they opened the whole thing, like they just cut the, how do you say, the ribbon, yeah? And like the second day, it was filled with bikers and skaters. And Jesus, I heard he's a great skater, and I think he would have loved probably to skate on those slopes. And the idea is that we thought of having this place filled with bikers and skaters and people doing all sorts of activities and having it lively and joyful and playful. But what they actually did was that they posted policemen on every entrance to guard the space from bikers and skaters, so that they would not go in, because they said that they would damage the stone with their, you know, so, which of course happened in time, because you cannot guard the place like 24 hours. But they were guarding, and they even wrote in the newspapers, like, don't go there, okay? This is not for you. And then, as I was reading, I found this really interesting quote by Ian Borden, who is a professor at AA. And he's talking how skaters and bikers and even parkour practitioners, they have a special way of understanding and reading the city that's different from the normal pedestrian, because to them the city is like a canvas, and they work with that canvas. And if you take them out, it's like you take some of the artists out of the city, some of the artists that consider the city to be their canvas, okay? And this was actually happening here. And this is what was happening. Architecture was being transformed into a Fabergé egg. It was like something very precious that was like enclosed in a glass box, and it was being surveyed all the time. Not by cameras, but by actual policemen. So it was no longer a public space, in my opinion. And this is another important French philosopher that I discovered after we finished the project, Henri Lefebvre, who did some studies in the 60s. He's a really interesting theoretical thinker that you could look into. And he says that space signifies what we can do and what we cannot do, okay? And it's all about power. So who controls the space, actually? Is it the users or the state or the town hall? And what's its assigned function in the end? Is it symbolic, or is it a real function? And this was the really sad part for us, because in like a few months after it was open, they tendered the new spaces to new tenants. And what was happening was that it got filled with this sort of shit. Sorry for my it's like you see here, like this sort of vases starting appearing, and chains and chairs all over, and all of a sudden, and not only that, but cars. Now, one of the big problems that this space had before it was refurbished is that it was being transformed into sort of a showroom. There were many companies selling cars that were putting their cars on display, and that was one of the things that we wanted to take out. And what we didn't realize was that we created a showroom that looked even better for them, because they put in back the cars, the expensive ones, you can imagine, okay? So they put in the expensive cars. And what you see here is an art intervention, because we have an art festival, and this was done by a local artist. And I think it was a nice intervention because you have to read it from above, and it's one of the few places where you can actually do that in our town. You have like a superior position, but you can see the art and the car together, so that looks really nice. And you can compare the two images. Now, of course, the first one is very barren, you might say, but we wanted everything to happen here, which it didn't. That's how we imagined it. And we wanted the square to be like a public space for everyone. Unfortunately, it turned into this. As you can see, the architecture is no more. There's no play in that. Not only that, but I remember that when they opened the place, I wanted to go there. I was really proud. I took my wife, we all dressed up, we wanted to go there. And I realized that I couldn't find a place in that thing because it was filled with chairs and tables and all sorts of rich people that were sitting there. And I felt like they took my square away. Like I was really furious about it. Like I wanted to walk on this and I just couldn't, because like there were all these guys that were looking at me and like, they were very cocky, very proud of their new place. And that was my place, in a way. I say, how dare they? But yeah, well, this is how it works, architecture. It never turns out as you imagine it would turn. So there is this really funny drawing by a local artist. He's called Dan Perzhovski. He's really famous. I would say that right now he's the most famous artist in Romania. And he's a guy that he does his art on walls. He writes on walls, okay? That's all he does. He doesn't produce anything that you can sell. He's just invited to draw on walls, okay? And he does these sort of drawings. And I found this drawing, and it was exactly what was happening there, okay? Because, this is okay, and you can see why. This is not okay, okay? And this is what our project, like a space for all, where all can sit and do whatever they like. But in fact, what they wanted was a place where all can sit and consume. His name is Dan Perzhovski. I will, yes. He's really interesting with his commentaries. I think he lives more abroad than in Romania, because he's constantly being invited to all sorts of museums, and he's constantly drawing up things. So he's, this was pretty ironic, because this was happening with our project, okay? And then this appeared. Like the first art gallery in that space, they had this banner. And it says, as you can read, rich people buy art. Because it was like trying to speak with the new patrons of the place, the people that were, yeah, you think it's better? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I have no idea who David Zwimmer is, but I have to say I hate this quote. Because I don't think art is about rich people buying it. It should be about something completely different. And that was again, a treason of what we thought that space would be. So, but we didn't realize that we were actually building this whole thing. We were taking part in it without knowing, because what we did was we created a space that was so different, so out there compared to all the spaces that were around it, that it was immediately captured by the people that needed to represent themselves with that space. So that's what basically Heterotopia is. It's another type of space, a special space that's out of all other spaces. Yes? Yeah, okay, sure, no problem.
Ok, importante de todo lo que ha hablado Cristian, que obviamente ha sido muy anecdótico y nos ha hablado de su experiencia como un primer proyecto que representaba una gran oportunidad para la ciudad y para los arquitectos que participaron en él. y que finalmente todas las intenciones que estaban detrás de la arquitectura aparentemente surtieron el efecto completamente opuesto, no necesariamente por la arquitectura, sino por la forma en que la ciudad y las autoridades y la sociedad de la ciudad incorporó el proyecto a la dinámica misma de la ciudad. Entonces, cuando él habla de heterotopía, es importante que tengamos claro. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about heterotopia as a concept. Ok, bueno, él va a hablar un poco más de ese concepto. Ajá. Pero es importante que entendamos es que, fíjense cómo él se enfoca en que el proyecto no fue un éxito, sino todo lo contrario, sino que el proyecto falló, independientemente de que la arquitectura como tal, como forma, como, ¿verdad? como estética, no necesariamente falló. O sea, ellos hicieron un diseño con unas intenciones, pero al final el uso ha sido lo que ha determinado si el proyecto realmente ha sido exitoso o no. Y es importante que ustedes se den cuenta también de algunos puntos que él ha mencionado acerca de la democratización del espacio o la falta de democracia en el espacio público que se ha dado aquí. Cuando la intención era que hubiese accesibilidad universal, o sea, que todo el que quisiera pudiera participar ahí, que las primeras personas que se interesaron en usar el espacio fueron las personas que hacen skateboarding y ciclismo de ese tipo extremo, y que inmediatamente empezaron a ponerse trabas, a ponérsele prohibiciones a estas personas para que no pudieran acceder al espacio. Porque había que proteger la arquitectura, porque no se podía ensuciar, porque los materiales no se podían desgastar. Y luego, fíjense cómo entonces se da un proceso en el que de manera literal y gradual se fue privatizando el espacio y, peor aún, identificándose ese lugar con un grupo específico, económico y social, que de alguna manera se apoderó de este lugar. Entonces es importante como esos puntos que lo tengamos claro, y ahora vamos entonces a ver a qué se refiere él con heterotopía.
Thank you. Even I understood that, so thank you. That's great. I couldn't have said it better. I realize now that I should have made it much shorter. So yeah, there is this question: is this public space privatized? Is it still public? Who does it belong to really? And how do you use it? And those were questions that we were asking. And what was really important, because I told you that they managed to get back into space, you know what they did? And I think you probably have the same type of activities here. But our country, unfortunately for us, it's quite corrupt also. So they transformed their activity of the companies into cultural ones. So they had a bar, but they just said, well, now we are a cultural bar, and we will take up this space, and we will be a bar that's once a month has an exhibition, and we will use it, okay? And that's how all the previous tenants, they got their spaces back, basically. So it was like they were using EU money to create better spaces for the guys that were already in the building, and you can imagine what type of owners those people were. They were like people with connections, and I don't have to go into that. So that was pretty disappointing to us, because no new activities were introduced from our perspective. So there is this question of the right to the square. Who has the right to the square? And there's many battles like this all around the world, in many places. This is like a constant struggle around public space. Who actually has the right to use it and how? And what I did, trying to understand, was I started to read. The crisis came. I discussed this with Jesus. The crisis came in 2008. We were somehow out of jobs, couldn't produce any more architecture, not on this scale anyway. So I started teaching. like many others my age, started reading, started doing my PhD. And while I was reading for my PhD, I came across all sorts of writers that I had no idea existed, because I was not really interested into that kind of thing. I just wanted to do renderings and to do nice architecture and to be an architect. I didn't care much about theory back then. It was just like very intuitive, and all I could care was creating nice things, okay? And then I realized that, okay, I cannot do that anymore because there's no clients for that. So I said, why not do something for myself and do a PhD and do some reading and try to understand what I have been doing up to that point. So I started a PhD in the local art school, and they wanted me to do a PhD about artists in the city. But actually the guys there, they wanted me to do a PhD about sculptures and all sorts of art projects in the city, but like very traditional. I said, well, that's really boring. I don't want to do that as an architect. So I said, why don't I look at the social perspective of what it means to be an artist in the city? And I started reading all sorts of things, and one of the interesting guys that I came across was this French philosopher I told you about, Henri Lefebvre. And then there was another one, Soja, that's an American, that took his ideas and moved them forward. And they have this idea that space is composed of 3 dimensions. And this is really important, because I realized that you could actually have this view of space in any type of project. Not only urban project, but even in a small architecture project. So space is basically split in first, second, and third space, and it has a perceived quality, it has a conceived quality, and it has a lived quality. And probably the last one is the most important one. And of course, you can read the text. And I just want to say that we, as architects, we usually operate with conceived space because we conceive it. We are the ones that shape it. We create it through our own imagination, like we did back there. We were only interested in doing some nice shape, something that was like symbolic and looked nice. But actually, there's also the matter of how people actually perceive the space. And this first space, the perceived space, is the way that people interact with it. Okay? It can be daily routine, but it can be more than that. What's really important in their theory is that space should be lived, and that it should have all qualities. It should be symbolic, it should be perceived in certain ways, but also it should encourage activities. So it should not be very petrified. And what I realized was that our project was actually petrifying the space. We were literally petrifying. It was made with stone and turned everything into stone, because nothing was being done there, because they were afraid not to destroy the stone, actually. It was like frozen. And of course, then there is this definition of what spatiality is by Soja, but I will not go through that. Basically, spatiality is this quality of the third space that is made up by lived space, perceived space, and conceived space. So all 3 should somehow work together to create a good quality space. And then I said, well, this is an interesting idea. Why don't I look at the other spaces in town, at the other squares, and see how they are compared to our project? Because maybe we could find the key of why our project is not working by looking at how other squares actually work and why they do. And this is, okay, this is the map of the city, and I have to use this again. So this is our square, this is the city center, or the old quarter, and we have 3 squares here, 1, 2, 3. This is the one university campus, second, third, fourth. So we have students all around, then some other smaller squares here, here, here. These are the former exterior neighborhoods, which are really nice also, historic, even taller, I would say, as architecture than the center, because they were built at the beginning of the 19th century, so they had more space and they look a bit different. But I would say that people in Timișoara usually go to this area and to these 3 main squares. So, what's up with them? Okay. So I tried to make a chart to see what's the difference between these. So I made these color charts. don't know if they're nice or not. Maybe they're not that accurate, but I want to see how these qualities overlap or not, which has more perceived qualities or more conceived qualities and is more like symbolic in its architecture, or which of these is the actual lived space. And I would say that this square here is the one that is the most lively and where people usually tend to go. There is a reason for that. So this is the first square. This is the main, you would say, the main square of the city center. And why it is the city center? It is because it has the theater with the opera house in it and three different ethnic group theaters inside. And then on the opposite side is the cathedral somewhere around here. And they call it the Corso because in the beginning of the century, this is like the Calle de las Damas. This is where the ladies would walk, okay? Everybody would walk here. This is the place where the shops would be. So it's the main area for walking. It still is a very important place. And the Romanian anti-communist revolution started here. This is the balcony where it all happened. So this was filled with people. Now, I know we are a bit different. We are the opposite of what's happening here. So our dictatorship was a communist one imposed by the Russians. You have the other way around here. But it's the same thing, basically, just ideologies that don't work as they should. So. And this is the square that I told you about. This is the square that people usually go to. And as you can see, it's flat, but it's empty. And it's, for those of you that will be coming to Timișoara, you'll see that people come here and do all sorts of things. You can do anything. You can sit on the grass, you can play football, do picnics, you can walk around. This is a winter picture, but in the summer there's lots of terraces. It's really nice. It's a nice place. And this space was built up in time. So I would say that it took about 20 years for people to realize that actually this is the main square and not the one with the opera house. So I would say that all the bohemians, the artists, the architects, the designers, all the people like us, you know, the cool ones, would go here. And then there is a third square, which has had a really tragic story, very similar to our project. Okay, these are pictures from this square. Yeah, it's got nice architecture. It's very it's scale to the human scale. It's really nice. It's got lots of details, very romantic. And then there's this third square, which is called the Liberty Square. And this was a square like a park. The only thing nice about it was that it was a park. And in the past, the trams would cross through here. You can see this historic image. It was a park way back. And then there was this project that they would turn the whole historic city into a pedestrian area. And they had this project for this square where they would keep all the trees, but they would actually only do the pavement. They would redo the pavement so that it's more unitary, but keep all the trees, okay? This was not done by us. This was done by other companies. And the project was concerning these 3 squares. Here they made some minor interventions. This one, and here's a smaller one when they dug up like a hole and they found some ruins. It's also very interesting as a space. The problem with this space is that when they did the site, they turned the place into this. They cut down all the trees. So what used to be like a park is now just a field of bricks. Why do you think that is? Because the project was not like that. Because sorry. Probably. I would say so. They wanted to turn this into a square where they could put terraces, they could have events, they could put a stage, bring in lots of people for festivals and stuff like that. But they already had that square, okay? So we had a square like that. We didn't need a new one. So that was a decision that was taken like overnight without any consultation from the population. Population was furious because what they did was like, they just, as they were building, they chopped down 1 tree every week, like, oh, this was old, oh, we touched this one with the crane, and sorry about this one. And in 2 weeks, all the trees were gone. And of course, there is a problem with this because the EU will not give you the money if you change the project. Okay, so then they realize that, oh, we took down the trees. What's going to happen now? So they started, they finished, and they started to dig these holes for new trees. But the new trees are this small, okay? But they are the same number as the old trees. Mathematics is the same. You have an Excel chart with the same amount of trees, but the space is different. Something that was a park has turned into something that is also a heterotopia or whatever. It's a space that has lost its soul, basically. It's a space that is no longer what it used to be because it has a different logic now. And of course, you can imagine that these trees are so small that they create no shade. And we have the same problem back home. So in July, August, it can get to 40 degrees. So it's really hot. Nobody goes here. Nobody stays here. They just pass through and go to the other squares because it's too hot to stay. Like if you measure the temperature on the ground level, I think it's like 50 degrees because of that. So this was another failed square. So why is this third space important? Because I've shown you my project and all these other projects, all these other squares. They're all somehow connected to one another. Well, I would say that my project partially failed because the other squares were so powerful when we created our project that it was not powerful enough to bring in the people that were actually going to the other squares, and that they created like a community in Unirii Square, in Liberty Square, and in Victoria Square. And the people that were going to our place were people that actually needed a platform to affirm their position in town, okay, if you understand what I mean. I don't want to go into details with that. But basically, this is what happened. It transformed into a new type of logic of social control where you would have consumers, the seduced, and architecture was the tool that was being used to seduce, and the non-consumers, the repressed, the guys that were not allowed to use their skates, that were not allowed to walk around freely because there would be terraces in what should have been a public space. So it was split in two, consumers and non-consumers. And of course, you can ask how democratic is space, really. And I say this like fiat heterotopia because this is what happened, basically. And one of the last things that I read was this guy text. This is famous, you know. This guy is a French philosopher. He's very cocky, always with leather jackets, looks like a rock star. He was very famous in his time, still is, very influential, Michel Foucault. And he had a small text that I stumbled upon. And I took out some quotes from it because it's really, really important and somehow describes what heterotopia is. So this is the boring part. Now you can look on Twitter and Facebook if you haven't done so already. So this is really boring. So what heterotopia is a different type of space. What Foucault is saying is that basically the logic of the whole 20th century and all the dialectical struggle that Jesus has been talking about in the beginning, this is what I understood in Spanish. I understood that much. Yeah, is about space and who owns it and what types of spaces we live in. And he has a really interesting argument, and I would suggest that you all read this text. It's not very long. You can read it like in 10 minutes. Yeah, okay, maybe 30 minutes, depending on your agility, to say so. So it's quite short, but very interesting, because it talks about basically all the architecture projects. All architecture projects are in essence heterotopias, all of them, because they try to create different spaces, different from what's around them. And there is also a story to that difference. Why is it different? And if you make it too different, you might end up, like we did, with a space that works to the contrary of what you thought it would. Okay, so which part should I read? Okay, so he says that first there are utopias, and you know how utopia works, okay? And then heterotopia is like a built utopia, but it's on a smaller scale, okay? And the difference between heterotopia and normal space is that it's different in the way that people are trying to put into it certain qualities that they consider to be really important on a symbolical level, okay? Okay, so he has some points, he has some principles, and I would start with the third one, because the first one may be not so important for us, but there's these principles, and I took out some quotations that I think are important. What is heterotopia? So heterotopia is capable of juxtaposing in a single real place several spaces, several sides that are themselves incompatible. So it brings together things that shouldn't be there, okay, first of all. It's a very layered space in that respect. The fourth principle, it acts like a slice in time. It has no time. It doesn't belong to the past. It doesn't belong to the present. It could be a representation of the future, but it is not clear who and why and in what time period it actually belongs to. And that was somehow a quality that our space also had. It was partly in the past, but partly in the present, looking at the future. It was somehow in between these slices of what time could be. So, and what's also interesting is that it's a space where time accumulates and objects accumulate. It's like a repository. Museums act like that. Cultural spaces act like that because they bring in all sorts of stuff that shouldn't be there together at all, because they come from different places, different times, but they act like a repository of things. A really important principle that also applied to our project, it says that it presupposes a system of openings and closings that both isolate and makes space penetrable. And we were actually doing that because we were creating spatial limits. We made the whole thing white. So that was different on the ground level from the whole city. It was different that you were stepping in to something that was penetrable, but at the same time, once you were in, it was something else. And then we opened up all those gates. It was opening up the space, but at the same time, it was closing it, because you need a certain courage to go through that and to go into that world, which is very different because it is enclosed by walls. And the sixth principle is that, well, I have to read this because I don't remember what this is about. Well, I must have put in here. Yeah, exactly. It's here. Perfect, meticulous, arranged, contrary to our messy world, okay? So what we did was we created a space that was so arranged, so aesthetic, that it was impossible to touch a single thing without destroying it. So that's why they didn't want skaters, bikers, and people that were not acting according to the rules, because they were destroying the rules. And that was a heterotopia. That was a space that was already so perfectly laid out that you could not touch anything in it, okay? It was impossible to move an object or to change one surface or to change anything about it. And that's bad. I would say now that's bad for an architecture project to somehow freeze it in a certain time and not allow people to change it by using, okay? This is really important. You have to think about it. Think about how your projects will change in time through the actual usage of that space, okay? Yeah, I think this is the last one. Yeah, and this is the last image, okay? So, yes, this is it, I think. I hope, just to make like one final remark so that I don't go so abruptly, I hope that this was interesting because to you, especially as students, because as I tell you, for me it represents like almost a project that has followed me around in all these years. So I started, as I told you, like I was really young, 24. I just wanted to produce architecture, to make it nice, to be known with something that would remain in my city. Didn't really think about what I was actually doing, didn't really understand what I was doing at that time. And then, through certain circumstances, I realized that what I built there, and that's the title of the whole thing, the premise of my talk today, what I built there was something completely different from what I ever imagined it would be in the end. And there is this, and I have to go back, because this is really important, I just remembered. Let me see if I can go back to that slide. Yeah. This, I wrote this because I made this presentation before, like I think 5 years ago, but in a different way. So I have to say I recycled some material. I'm sorry, I have to admit that. So I recycled some material, but as I was reading it, I realized something really important. I was reading this final statement here, like it says, furthermore, is this new logic of spatial segregation rooting its slow demise? And I would say yes, because back then, that space was still being used, okay, by certain types of people. It was being used. Right now, some of you will be coming to the channel, you see it's completely dead. Nobody goes there anymore. So its demise was fulfilled in 4 or 5 years. From my last talk to this talk, it's kaput, as we say. It's gone. It's there, it's nice, you can look at it, but it doesn't work as a space anymore. Nobody goes there anymore because other spaces, more interesting spaces with different types of activities have sprung up in the city. And you know how people are if they're not very attached to one place and if they like to move around and they need like everything to have the latest experience, what's the hippest thing. They are not very loyal to space, okay? If a new thing that's better is being built, they would move there. And this is what happened here. Like they moved to the mall, to the new mall. So this died because of that, okay? So yes, I guess this is what I wanted to show you. So if you have any questions regarding this or anything else for that matter, I would like to respond. But I think Melissa would want to translate what I said, or yeah. Thank you very much for having me here. So.
Ok. Importante de esta parte, como habíamos acordado, era que él iba a entrar en detalle con el concepto de heterotopia. Ustedes, primeramente, como él señaló, este es un concepto que fue desarrollado en un texto del filósofo francés Michel Foucault. Esa es la foto que le enseñó del filósofo, que fue un pensador muy radical en los años 60 y que además de hablar de estos temas, él fue un pensador que se enfocó mucho en la relación espacial de las relaciones de poder en la sociedad, ¿verdad? Entonces, como él se enfocó en eso, este texto en arquitectura ha sido muy importante a través del tiempo. Se ha leído mucho y se ha analizado mucho porque precisamente trae a la mesa conceptos que para nosotros están ocultos. O sea, no son evidentes. O sea, nosotros no podemos ver estas dinámicas. Mira cómo él diseñó el proyecto y no pudo predecir que todas estas cosas iban a suceder allí. Incluso aún nosotros vemos con nuestros ojos, ¿verdad?, que pasan estas cosas, que se privatiza el espacio y todavía a veces no entendemos el trasfondo y el significado de esos acontecimientos. Entonces, por eso él entonces empieza a explicarnos un poco, a sintetizar los principios que el filósofo Michel Foucault establece para definir y explicarnos a qué él se refiere o qué significa la heterotopía. Entonces, dentro de los principios, una de las cosas importantes, quizá que nos conciernen y que él por eso puntualiza, es que primero la heterotopía siempre tiene un carácter espacial. O sea, nosotros entramos y salimos constantemente de heterotopías. Cuando yo estudiaba, por ejemplo, los profesores nos ponían ejemplos como los juegos de fútbol o un juego de pelota. Cuando tú llegas a un estadio y tú entras ahí, cada participante de esa dinámica tiene un rol y hay un espacio y reglas y todas las reglas cambian inmediatamente. O sea, ahí hay una heterotopía en el sentido de que eso es una realidad alterna, por decirle así. Entonces, él lo que también explica, y en eso podemos hablar y demás, es que la arquitectura de alguna manera siempre es una heterotopía. Porque nosotros como arquitectos, cuando diseñamos, cuando creamos espacios, son espacios alternos, con reglas, con unas características especiales, que inmediatamente nosotros entramos, por ejemplo, a un auditorio, a un cine, o a cualquier tipología, asumimos casi inconscientemente las reglas y la dinámica que se da dentro de ese lugar. Entonces, ¿qué ha sucedido, por ejemplo, en nuestro sistema capitalista en el que vivimos? donde todos nos hemos vuelto consumidores o potenciales consumidores, es que sin darnos cuenta a veces nuestra producción material arquitectónica puede prestarse inconscientemente, bueno, lo que están en teoría conmigo y que hemos estado hablando muchísimo de ese tema últimamente, de la conciencia sobre lo que estamos haciendo y el significado. A veces, como él dice, yo era un arquitecto joven, yo quería hacer algo bonito, un proyecto que se viera bien, algo que pudiera publicarse en una revista como buena arquitectura. Sin embargo, fíjense cómo fue el escenario perfecto para que una dinámica de poder, una relación de poder en la sociedad, entonces se prestara para que no fuera un espacio democrático, por ejemplo. Entonces, otro de los principios que él menciona, además de esa definición espacial de la heterotopía, es esa cualidad como de sacarnos del tiempo, donde se pierde el tiempo, donde no estamos, como él dice, ni en el presente, ni en el pasado, ni en el futuro. Estamos en un tiempo alterno. Otro ejemplo, por ejemplo, de heterotopía son los parques temáticos. Cuando uno va a Disney, tú entras a Disney, las reglas son diferentes, a veces ya el tiempo corre como en otro ritmo, nos sentimos en otra realidad, o sea, es como entrar y salir de ahí tiene un efecto sobre nosotros. Igual también, importante para entender el concepto, es que cuando entramos en una heterotopía, siempre la entrada y la salida es algo claro, o sea, es como... Fíjense cómo incluso en esos proyectos el tema del pavimento, o sea, esa demarcación de que esto no es el resto de la ciudad, todo es un espacio diferente. Fíjense que también él hablaba de la materialidad, de cómo él utilizaba al petrificar el suelo, al volverlo una superficie homogénea y lisa y de otro color y demás, también fue un factor que determinó que se volviera una heterotopía. O sea, fíjense cómo con gestos formales y algo que nos parece como muy lógico y muy algo sí, vamos a hacer un pavimento, tiene todos estos trasfondos, o sea, ¿cómo podemos nosotros crear a través de nuestras intervenciones dinámicas específicas? Y mientras más conciencia tenemos sobre eso, podemos anticipar que un lugar realmente sea democrático o no, por ejemplo. Otra cosa que él mencionaba era el hecho de que al final, que creo que un mensaje importante, es que no podemos olvidarnos de que la arquitectura es para los usuarios y que el usuario también debe haber cierta flexibilidad o debe haber un entendimiento y quizás hasta una actitud humilde del arquitecto de que su obra va a ser modificada por el uso. O sea, siempre quisiéramos, ¿verdad?, que se quedara perfecto porque vemos como nuestro trabajo como una obra de arte y demás. Pero en realidad los espacios, la vida del espacio es el uso y las personas que están ahí. Entonces, ese uso va a dejar una huella, va a dejar va a impactar de alguna manera a la arquitectura. Y eso, en lugar de verlo como algo negativo, deberíamos verlo como algo positivo. O sea, eso es como, él puso la foto de ¿cómo es que se llaman? VX, de los huevos Fabergé, que son, o sea, un objeto para ser observado y muy cuidado. Eso es como por ejemplo en nuestra cultura, que tenemos el comedor que no se usa en la casa, o la vitrina con las cositas que no se tocan, o las copas que no se usan. O sea, al final eso no... ok, ellos también tienen eso, o sea, es como, ¿para qué eso está ahí? Para ser observado. Son objetos que pierden toda utilidad y entonces tener esa actitud ante nuestro trabajo, o sea, sobre la arquitectura realmente no tiene ningún sentido, ¿verdad? O sea, entonces yo creo que en general esas eran como de las ideas que él al final concluyó y yo quisiera ahora como, bueno, pasarle la palabra a José Enrique y motivarlos también a que vayan pensando en qué cosas ustedes quisieran conversar, cualquier tipo de interés que ustedes tengan con relación al proyecto, el proceso de hacerlo, todo lo que él ha hablado. Ustedes se han dado cuenta que Chris es una persona sumamente abierta, o sea que no pierdan la oportunidad y vamos a conversar con él.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Yo asombrado con Melissa, porque Melissa sintetiza muy bien, o sea que hay que tener cuidado lo que uno habla frente a Melissa porque ella lo graba todo con punto y coma. Bueno, Cristian, creo que fue una presentación fantástica. la forma en que lo presentaste y cómo los estudiantes pueden tomar en cuenta muchos de los puntos que has planteado. Antes de comenzar la conferencia, la charla, estábamos hablando ahí precisamente de temas reales de la ciudad de Santo Domingo, problemas puntuales, ese tipo de cosas, y las reflexiones que tenemos sobre los espacios públicos. El espacio público no es un espacio que se diseña porque sí, sino es el resultado de una demanda de una sociedad que cree en esa democratización. Si la sociedad no es democrática en términos de sus relaciones sociales, en términos interpersonales, entonces el espacio público no tiene sentido. Y el espacio público también es el resultado, además, de la conciencia del sujeto. Yo como sujeto, el sujeto tiene que estar definido para yo tener mi conciencia de lo que significa el lugar que yo ocupo y las aspiraciones que yo tengo en ese lugar para entonces participar de ese espacio público. Muchas veces nosotros entendemos que porque diseñamos un lugar común y creamos un espacio vacío donde ahí debe haber un parque o debe haber algo que la gente se reúna, van a suceder esas cosas. Y la realidad no es esa, la realidad es que es la sociedad misma que demanda sus espacios. A veces está el espacio público diseñado y la gente prefiere estar en una esquina, en un negocio, en un colmadón o arriba de un carro, etcétera, lo que significa que hay una incoherencia en cuanto a lo que es espacio público. Pienso que como didáctica de la charla de Cristian, una de las cosas que yo quiero señalar y aprovechando su presentación es, y ver el escenario que tenemos de estudiantes que están a media carrera y principio de carrera, es que entiendan cómo diseñar en arquitectura, que muchas veces, y cuando uno ve a los estudiantes que ya están llegando a los finales, como nos toca a nosotros, todavía no han aprendido lo que es la arquitectura en sí mismo. Y fíjense cómo él, para abordar un proyecto arquitectónico urbano, primero parte del ser humano y la conducta del ser humano y de la conducta social de lo que va sucediendo, y él entonces va buscando esas identidades, esos elementos importantes para entonces incorporarlo en una respuesta. El diseño es una respuesta, no es un planteamiento teórico que yo pongo y entonces la gente tiene que entenderlo y usarlo, sino que es al revés. El arquitecto debe primero hacer ese análisis global de lo que está sucediendo, las necesidades que surgen, para entonces dar la respuesta. Parece sencillo lo que yo estoy diciendo, pero en la práctica no se hace muchas veces así. Otro elemento es la investigación. Fíjense cómo él, que va a intervenir en un lugar con cierto significado histórico o para la ciudad que fue cambiado en el tiempo, él busca la esencia misma. Él se va inclusive a la época medieval, cuando la ciudad tenía una forma, identifica ese lugar y ha visto la transformación de ese lugar para entonces él en este momento, en el presente, hacer su intervención. Pero esa intervención no es un asunto de deseo personal de él, sino que es una combinación del estudio que él ha hecho, de la forma en que se usa la ciudad y las necesidades, y del significado que ha tenido ese lugar, para él entonces intervenirlo sin hacerle daño al lugar, sino potencializando el lugar. O sea, eso es una de las condiciones que debe tener un arquitecto a la hora de intervenir en un proyecto arquitectónico o a la hora de intervenir en un espacio público. Eso es algo que yo quiero hacer hincapié, porque en la escuela nuestra, y estamos hablando de nuestra escuela, muchas veces el estudiante se pierde en ese y se va a la forma, se va al resultado inmediato, y eso no tiene esencia. Y cuando entonces tú le preguntas por qué ha llegado a esa decisión, entonces no tiene las herramientas para contestarte, porque ha sido un ejercicio geométrico, no un ejercicio real. Entonces, viendo también como una consecuencia de la conferencia, nos queda que la arquitectura es un asunto de pensamiento y de teoría. Aunque es algo práctico, si el estudiante de arquitectura no se acostumbra a investigar la razón por la cual el espacio o la arquitectura se desarrolla, entonces no va a suceder nada transformador ni nada trascendente. O sea, no es un asunto estético, no es un resultado estético para fotografías o que me guste o no me guste, sino es resultado de una investigación que los pensadores de muchas otras áreas de la humanidad interfieren o intervienen en ese pensamiento arquitectónico. Y él puso el caso de Foucault, y Melissa lo ha dicho, que es un texto o uno de los teóricos más importantes en otras áreas, en áreas muy disímiles, pero son pensadores tan potentes que obviamente tienen que utilizar esos pensamientos para llevarlo a lo concreto y tienen que caer en la arquitectura. Porque la arquitectura es lo concreto, al final termina siendo lo concreto, y eso nos afecta a nosotros. Entonces, ese tipo de investigaciones necesitamos incorporarlas a nuestro pensamiento. No basta que Melissa Vargas, Alex Martínez o cualquiera de nosotros como profesora le demos teoría de la arquitectura por un lado, historia de la arquitectura por el otro y diseño por otro, si ustedes no hacen una combinación de las tres patas. O sea, el diseño no es algo autónomo y la teoría es una materia para pasarla. La teoría lo que te está dando son los insumos para tú abordar el problema de diseño arquitectónico. Y en la medida que tú seas más consciente de esas informaciones y más domines más la información específica, tú vas a ser al menos un diseñador con una propuesta personal, una propuesta que puede trascender. En el caso de Cristian y de su equipo, fíjense cómo él entendió el espacio con un imaginario de ese lugar, como él pensaba que iba a suceder. La ciudad, obviamente, como explicó, la utilizó de otra forma, pero eso también es positivo porque una vez tú entregas un resultado arquitectónico, lo das hacia afuera y el que está afuera lo usa, lo transforma, lo modifica y te enseña a ti inclusive para nuevas alternativas. No puede ser solamente desde el punto de vista, como dije al principio, formal, estético, que yo puse, mira qué bien se ve, que estamos comentando, bienvenido Pantaleón y yo, mira qué interesante los techos, etcétera. Eso es formal, eso nos agrada a nosotros porque somos arquitectos, pero detrás de eso hay toda una parte vivencial que el proyecto tiene que transmitirlo. Yo creo que podemos abrir los micrófonos con estas reflexiones, tanto lo que Melissa ha dicho como lo que dijo Cristian, y ahora yo con mis reflexiones quizás podemos motivar a que los estudiantes participen, que deben hacerlo. Bienvenido, tiene un comentario.
Mira, excelente exposición. Yo quisiera, José Enrique, agregarle otra pata a la mesa a la que te refieres. Te refieres a la arquitectura como ejercicio. Muchas veces hacemos nuestros propios monumentos, nuestras propias expresiones, y se agrega la parte de la teoría, y se agrega, ¿te referiste a la tercera pata de la mesa? Ok, pero yo le agregaría una cuarta pata a la mesa, y es la sociología, o sea, cómo se comportan los asentamientos humanos, cómo cada sociedad, cada ente humano es diferente. Entonces vemos, y me llama mucho la atención, que una buena arquitectura como fue desarrollada en ese emplazamiento, lleno de cantidad de mobiliario urbano, bien diseñado, bien a escala, bien en contexto, que no agrede ese casco urbano, ese contexto urbano que está ahí. Pero ¿qué sucede? Está una sociedad que tiene una forma de cómo pensar, que está ahí. Entonces, ¿cómo la sociedad apropia, cómo identifica esos elementos? Cómo el que maneja el skateboard o el que está en la bicicleta interpreta esa rampa no como una pieza formal, no como una pieza de dirección, no como una pieza de escala, sino como una pieza de escalar, como una pieza de rodar, de lanzarse. Entonces, cuando tomamos esas decisiones, muchas veces tenemos que trascender un poquito más al papel, del papel a la realidad. ¿Por qué? Porque estamos impactando una zona que no solamente es histórica, lo histórico quedó, hay que preservarlo, hay que mantenerlo, pero hay que darle la pincelada humana. ¿Por qué? Porque esa gente que está alrededor ahí y ese contexto urbano, esa sociedad que está ahí va a apropiarse de ese lugar y le va a dar un uso. Entonces, ¿qué sucede? Ya había un ente, una parte de la sociedad influyente en esa zona que se apropió del lugar e instauró una serie de gazebos, de toldos, que a nosotros eso como arquitectos muchas veces lo primero que decimos es nos sentimos indignados, me dañaron el lugar, porque es la parte que no estaba planificada. Es la parte que no estaba planificada. Entonces muchas veces tenemos tener hasta la bola de cristal en nuestras manos para visualizar qué cosas pueden suceder con eso que estamos implantando ahí. Entonces, la cuarta parte de la mesa yo diría que es la sociedad. Analizar la sociedad en términos antropológicos, en términos cómo se comportó la sociedad en un tiempo y cómo se está comportando ahora y cómo puede comportarse después, porque estoy segurito que esas imágenes que están ahí, pasado mañana o dentro de unos días, ya la sociedad tiene otra forma de cómo ver las cosas y va a cambiar también. Ese es mi aporte.
Bueno, tú sabes que yo estaba pensando ahora como proyecto así heterotópico que ha ido cambiando también. En el Malecón hay una plaza que se llama Juan Barón, que no existía cuando nosotros éramos jóvenes. Eso tiene apenas, ¿qué? 10 años, 15 años tiene, más o menos. Exacto, porque era el rompeolas. La gente lo que hacía era que caminaba en el rompeolas, que ya el rompeolas no, el mar se lo comió, porque el rompeolas llegaba casi 800 metros, un espigón, y entonces eso era como la tierra que sobraba, y al final hicieron una plaza ahí, y entonces hicieron la plaza ahí, y el parque Ramfi, el parque Eugenio María de Hostos cerrado, porque estaba en remodelación, la gente se apropió de este lugar, abren el parque Eugenio María de Hostos, y la gente no usa el parque Eugenio María de Hostos, sigue usando la Plaza Juan Barón, pero sin embargo ha ido cambiando la misma Plaza Juan Barón con un diseño muy definido, pero el uso de los kioscos y todo eso se modificó y se ha ido modificando en el tiempo, pero ha sido un éxito, la gente utiliza ese lugar. Contrario a eso, un espacio totalmente diseñado, exquisitamente diseñado y después emulado para ampliarlo, como es la plaza que rodea el conjunto del Banco Central de la República Dominicana, muy cerca de aquí. Eso es una belleza. Tú pasas en tu vehículo y tú ves el teatro, el edificio principal, la plaza de un lado y la plaza del otro, con fuentes, etcétera. Y para fotos es fantástico, pero no hay un alma. Ahí no hay un alma, ni la ciudad se apropió de eso. Pero además, no te permiten usarla. O sea, además es un espacio público, pero si tú vas y tú dices, déjame sentarme en este banquito a verle, no, vienen 10 policías y te dicen, caballero, usted no puede estar ahí. Entonces, es una contradicción, o sea, entonces después lo hacen enfrente, cuando hacen el estacionamiento, dejan una franja inmensa como espacio público, no sabemos para qué, yo pensaba que era porque iban a hacer actividades multitudinarias y eso, y entonces ahí tampoco sucede nada. Y había un árbol, uno de los patrimonios naturales que tiene la ciudad, que para mí han sido 2 árboles que se fueron, que son huellas importantísimas de la ciudad y que de repente lo tiraron para nada. Uno de esos había un samán de más de 300 años que estaba en la esquina. Lo quitaron y yo decía, bueno, lo van a quitar porque ya, o sea, van a edificar, pero no, lo quitan y dejan la plaza sin nada en un país tropical donde se necesita la arborización y donde el árbol es un elemento simbólico. El otro árbol que se perdió fue el de la Roberto Pastoriza con Avenida Tiradentes, donde está la McDonald's. O sea, ahí había un samán también de 400 años y lo eliminan para hacer parqueo. Entonces hay una sensibilidad también de lo que nos pertenece como sociedad, que eso también es componente de nuestro espacio público, de nuestro derecho, que se nos va de la cara y más que se pierde lo que es la esencia misma de lo tropical a través de la huella natural. La Plaza España, otro caso penoso, pero vamos, que Jesús quiere decir algo.
No, yo quiero invitar, ustedes se acuerdan que al principio hablábamos de que ustedes van a estar aquí también participando. Yo quiero que me levanten las manos las personas que tienen preguntas ya. Aquí hay una, ¿quién más? Valientes, a ver. Preguntas, todo se vale, todo se puede preguntar, ¿eh? Allá alguien levantó la mano, se está arrancando la cabeza. Ven, por favor. Ven aquí, ven. ¿Quién más? Preguntas. Vamos a ver, otro valiente, que venga para acá. Preguntas. ¿Nadie tiene ninguna pregunta? ¿Todo el mundo entendió perfectamente? Este es un tema muy interesante para debatir y preguntar. ¿Cómo tú te llamas?
Natalia.
Yo quiero un aplauso para Natalia, que se paró aquí. Y voy a esperar que algunos de ustedes se vayan uniendo a Natalia y se pongan aquí y comiencen también a hacer sus observaciones y sus preguntas. Tú también, ven para acá, ven. Vamos, ¿cómo tú te llamas? ¿Tu nombre? Laura. Sara, ven. Ok, bueno, pues Natalia va a hacer una pregunta.
This is a question for you, Christian, that in the Dominican Republic, we have a lot of spaces that were intervened to make them work and they didn't work. And soon enough, they will be like our responsibility and the city will be ours. Like the changes, we will be the ones to make them. And what advice do you have so that we don't make those same mistakes again and we don't disrespect what other architects like did before us?
I think this is a really good question. And I don't know, from what I understood, I have the feeling that it was somehow addressed before by the professor speaking, but I think it's really important for you as young architects to try to not repeat the same mistakes that we did. Like, it's good to be enthusiastic about your project, but before you start building anything. You have to understand that architecture is more than form and renderings and doing just a nice project. You have to work with people that know how to look at space, with sociologists. You have to know a bit about philosophy, to know about a bit of the history of the place. So that's why all these subjects are really important in an architecture school, in my opinion. So you should not overlook them. You should not overlook theory, you should not overlook history, art history, sociology, economics, whatever. All these topics somehow give you an image, or it's not a complete image, but it is at least an image of what you could possibly do, what type of answer you could provide. So it is very important not to go into the project like, oh, I'm going to do that because that's what I like right now, okay? To try to understand what's the proper answer for the problem that you have in front of you. Each problem has a good way of answering it and a superficial way of being addressed. So try not to be superficial. That's all I can say. It's very complicated because it's a hard, so many hard decisions that have to be taken by you as an architect. It's impossible to say right now, oh, do that or do that. You will learn eventually what is to be done. I think it's all a matter of being into that project from as many perspectives as possible. If that answers your question.
¿Quién está de acuerdo con el argumento de que el proyecto inicial era una obra de arte? Aparte de la profesora Solange. Tú. Ven para que me explique por qué. Please. Ven, vamos. Ven acá. Vamos. Nosotros queremos gente que se involucre proactivamente en las discusiones. De hecho, ¿ustedes saben por qué se dan esos proyectos que al final nadie usa? ¿Ustedes saben por qué se dan esos proyectos que al final nadie usa? Porque la gente no interviene, no pregunta, no observa, no dice yo no estoy de acuerdo y no me da miedo decir que no estoy de acuerdo. Ven acá, ven por favor. ¿Cuál es tu nombre?
Salma.
Un aplauso a Salma.
O sea, yo no sé tanto de arquitectura todavía.
Todo se vale, tu opinión es importante y todo lo que tú digas tiene un sentido.
Pero en teoría, o sea, a mí me gustó mucho, en teoría, cómo iba a ser, porque, o sea, trataba de ambientar un espacio, me gustó mucho lo del cafecito y todo eso, y que había como un desnivel en el mismo terreno, y subía a otra parte, todo eso me gustó mucho, y como la morfología de todo, era muy bien pensado, pero lamentablemente no sucedió así, porque muchas veces se diseñan cosas y no se usan con ese mismo uso que se pensó en un principio, lamentablemente.
¿Quién no está de acuerdo con Salma?
Ay, qué bueno.
Mi nombre es Monserrat, pero yo lo que quiero decir, aparte de lo que ella dijo, que también se podría mirar como una obra de arte, porque era un lugar más para uno, como que tú no te sentías parte de él, sino que tú ibas, tú lo veías, pero tú te sentías como exterior a él. Tú tenías que mirarlo, no había mucho espacio para tú involucrarte con él y tú interactuar con él. Aparte del café, claro, que tú podías entrar y tenías que ser un consumidor, no tanto como una persona que simplemente tú podías sentirte como que tú estás habitando el lugar, sino el hecho de tú ir, tú te sentías que tú estabas como molestando el lugar, como que tú estabas de sobra. Así que yo lo siento como una obra de arte. Pero también hay obras de arte que invitan al espectador a uno formar parte de la obra, pero esa no la hacía tanto. Así que... Ajá. Como que en estética estaba bien, pero en la parte social, it lacked, como que le faltaba.
Yo quería hacer un comentario que yo creo que es importante. O sea, hemos hablado de cómo nosotros tenemos que auxiliarnos de otras ramas. Y, por ejemplo, esa es una forma de verlo, decir, bueno, estamos haciendo arquitectura, ¿verdad? Entonces vamos a auxiliarnos de la sociología, vamos a auxiliarnos de la filosofía y de la historia y todo eso. Sin embargo, yo creo que tal vez verlo como que la arquitectura no se auxilia de esas cosas, sea consciente o inconscientemente, integra todas esas cosas. Y el peligro está en que cuando lo hacemos inconscientemente no sabemos qué estamos propiciando. Mientras que si lo hacemos conscientemente, no vamos a poder predecir, no vamos a poder lograr a veces 100% lo que intencionalmente queremos lograr, pero tal vez tenemos más chance de promover algo que, con lo cual nosotros estamos identificados y creemos como arquitectos. Entonces, en lugar de pensar, por ejemplo, que Foucault habla de los espacios y de eso, y como que los filósofos lo ven así, es así. O sea, nosotros siempre estamos estableciendo con nuestras propuestas dinámicas dentro de los espacios que estamos creando. Siempre le pongo el ejemplo en la clase de teoría, que algo tan sencillo como la manera en que nosotros organizamos las sillas en un ambiente genera una dinámica distinta. Por ejemplo, ahora mismo ustedes están sentados allá y nosotros estamos aquí. Eso ya establece una forma de nosotros relacionarlo diferente, que si tal vez estuviéramos todos sentados en círculo, o si tal vez todos estuviéramos parados, caminándonos entre los otros. O sea, inmediatamente nosotros hacemos un planteamiento espacial, estamos estableciendo una dinámica entre las personas que van a utilizar ese espacio. Y de eso es que se trata mucho la investigación, por ejemplo, de Foucault. Él, una de las cosas que hizo fue analizar tipologías arquitectónicas, por ejemplo, como la de las escuelas, las prisiones, todo ese tipo de lugares donde las relaciones entre la autoridad y la persona que está siendo sujeta de la autoridad, por ejemplo, es algo muy claro, los hospitales y demás. Y, por ejemplo, una de las cosas importantes, como un hallazgo importante, es que el layout o la disposición de una escuela y la de una prisión en otras épocas, porque las escuelas han ido cambiando mucho también en ese sentido, era igual. O sea, una prisión, una escuela, o sea, tenían básicamente la misma estructura. Ok, o sea, y fíjense como el que diseña una escuela no está pensando que está haciendo una prisión, pero lo hace, lo puede, o sea, esa relación que se da entre esos espacios puede generar un ambiente de ese tipo. Entonces, o sea, como una de las cosas importantes de las lecciones importantes de este tipo de discusión es que hagamos conciencia de que los arquitectos tenemos que hacer un poco de todo eso. O sea, tenemos que ser un chin sociólogo, un chin antropólogo, un chin filósofo, todo eso, porque al fin y al cabo eso es lo que el espacio y el espacio construido, que no el espacio natural. El espacio natural no tiene nada de eso. Es parte de la producción humana. O sea, nosotros todo lo que hacemos es cultura, es civilización. O sea, lo físico y lo virtual, las dos cosas. Y no hay una cosa que condense más esas dos realidades, ¿verdad? La virtual y la real, que el espacio mismo, la arquitectura diseñada. Entonces, es tanto así que fíjense como la informalidad le hace todo aquello que se hace sin diseño, también produce lo mismo, relaciones entre las personas, o sea, hasta lo más inconsciente cuando produce, o sea, cuando el ser humano produce espacios, siempre hace eso. No importa, o sea, aunque tú no lo sepas. Entonces, es como esa idea de que nuestra producción es algo mucho más que algo, como decía al principio también Jesús, o sea, nosotros producimos plástica, ¿verdad? En la teoría es como él dice, o sea, quizá un ejercicio casi inverso de que nosotros entendamos a través de lo que hacemos qué es lo que estamos pensando, qué es lo que estamos haciendo como sociedad. Y aunque una vez se crea como, bueno, yo no tengo ninguna ideología, o yo no soy parte de ninguna ideología, o ahora mismo no hay ninguna ideología, en la arquitectura no hay ideología ya, siempre la hay. O sea, lo que pasa es que a veces no tenemos como un entendimiento de eso. O sea, entonces es importante que, como hemos hablado ya varias veces, o sea, que nosotros hagamos ese ejercicio también de inferir y conectar a través de nuestros propios ejercicios, lo que hacemos aquí como estudiantes, todo eso que nos vamos nutriendo en la cabeza. Y vamos a fallar. Fíjense, otra cosa yo creo que es importantísima de esta charla es que Cristian decidió hablarnos de lo que él considera un fracaso. Pero, failure. Lo que él que watch out, what are you saying? Pero él lo considera un fracaso, ¿verdad? O sea, y obviamente, yo creo como que estamos de acuerdo con que no necesariamente, digamos que el fracaso, I don't think the failure was yours. I think the failure was from this. Yeah, no, but no, I don't think the failure was from the architects. I think para mí el fracaso fue la forma en que las autoridades y todas las personas que tenían que ver con el uso de ese lugar, entonces hicieron un mal uso. Como, por ejemplo, prohibirle el acceso. ¿Por qué habría que prohibirle el acceso a nadie en un espacio público? Eso no tiene ninguna razón de ser. De hecho, si tal vez, maybe if the skaters and the bikers would have just made it all dirty and maybe people, como lo que decía Montserrat, o sea, ella decía, era como que no se podía tocar. Sí se podía, o sea, tal vez si hubieran dejado que se ensuciara un chin, la gente dice, ya, está un chin sucio, qué bueno, vamos, no, ya no me excluye. O sea, entonces como esa idea de que también yo creo que es interesante como que seamos humildes con nuestra práctica y que entendamos eso, de que nosotros somos también agentes culturales y sociales. ¿Te ibas a decir algo? ¿Había alguien? ¿Tú?
Una pregunta.
Pero yo... No. Hay dos opiniones allí y de...
Mira, yo entiendo que la intervención, el proyecto del colega él en un momento habló de fracaso, es un término que yo no lo entiendo de esa forma. Yo entiendo que su proyecto es un proyecto que provoca y provocó de tal forma, porque hay proyectos que se han hecho y quedan anodinos, que nadie los toma en cuenta. Nadie, absolutamente nadie, se quedan como monumentos al olvido. Pero sucede, su proyecto es una provocación. Con los códigos, inconscientemente, con los códigos utilizados, conectaste con un sector de la sociedad. Ese sector indirectamente iba a ser el usuario de esa actividad o de ese lugar, de apropiarse de ese lugar. ¿Dónde está el fracaso? El fracaso está en las autoridades, que no supieron comprender a quién era que se iba a apropiar del sitio.
¿Quién va? ¿Preguntas? Venga. Aquí. Vamos. A mí me encanta este murito porque parece como un murito de un vecindario donde la gente se sienta a hablar. Y me parece muy bueno para que ustedes se sienten aquí.
Hi, my name is Jesus, second year, and...
Oh, pues tú también eres Jesús.
Sí, tocayo. And I would like to ask you, if you had the chance to redesign that same space again, what would you do differently to make it actually work?
That's a great question, actually.
Man, I heard that you were smart, but man, this is beyond. I mean, well, I don't know what to answer to that. It's tough question. I'd probably do some research, different type of research before doing anything. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. I actually have never thought about that. You know, it's strange. The first time that anybody has asked me that, and yeah. Okay, so I have to admit, like the professor here said, I don't necessarily consider it to be our failure. So I think it was a failure in a way that it was understood. It wasn't, indeed, it was a provocation from our team because we wanted to create a space that was different, but we always thought that difference would actually make people come and enjoy it in a very joyful way, you know. And it was instead turned into this purely aesthetic experience. And I think that the worst thing that happened there was the fact that they actually did not bring real artists, real people of culture. They did not have rents that were affordable for those kind of people. The rents, they were just there, exactly. They were just there to put in back the old tenants. That was the problems. And the old tenants were faking it. It was, you know, there's another French philosopher, Baudrillard, who talks about simulacra. And this was a simulation of sorts. They were simulating culture and simulating artistry and stuff like that, but there was no such thing there, actually. So it was all a simulacra. And probably with better administration, with people that would actually had a bit of vision, that would have turned into a better thing. Because there are similar examples. For example, if you go to Holland, to Germany, to, I don't know, even to Spain, there were so many cultural centers that probably look like that, maybe nicer, and that actually work. Many of them work. So it's, yeah. What can I say? I have no answer for you. I would probably do it different now, maybe stylistically, maybe, yeah. I would have to think about it, yeah. Yeah, probably, yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. It's true. Unfortunately, you cannot choose the authorities. They're there, they are elected, and you have to work with them. Like it or not, you have them as a partner. So it all depends on how your partner understand his mission, because it's not only your mission as an architect. He also has part of a mission in this project.
Okay. Una persona más. Venga. Ella se estaba rascando aquí la espalda ahorita. Yo dije, wow, levantó la mano. Déjame.
Sí, pero ya estaba en eso.
Y no estaba en eso. Ahora sí.
Hello. I don't study architecture. I study tourism, but I know a little bit about art. So my question has to do a lot about structure, right? So what differentiates architecture that does not work, like it's not functioning, it's a failure, from a sculpture? Because if architecture is not functional for the use of architecture, of like to use as a building, then what does it differentiate from art, from a sculpture?
Yeah, so basically your question is if I get this, if our project is an art project, right? Or an architecture project, basically, or something like that?
I mean, yeah, because sculptures just is for beautifying the area.
I know where you're going. So yeah, in a way, we were creating a sculpture on an urban scale. It was supposed to be like a work of art, to have some aesthetic qualities also. We were aware of that, so you have to be honest about this. The thing is that it was only the aesthetic quality that was being read. So the other qualities, the functional things that we imagine, were not being actually used as we thought of. That's why it was strange for us that they were not actually allowing people to skate and to bike and to use it in any way they wanted. And they were keeping people off, and that's why it was strange. It was also strange for us that they actually put all the functions on top of the sculpture and not around it, because we always thought that the inner court would be like like a skate park, if you will, like a place where people would just play and stay and do things, and actually the people sitting around would look at that, and that would turn into like a spectacle, like an urban platform for people to see and be seen. And that didn't happen because they reversed the logic. They put the people in the middle, and actually it was pretty ironic because the people sitting in the middle were there to be seen by the others, because the ones that were walking around were actually seeing the ones that had the right to stay in the middle or had the means to stay in the middle. So they were reversing the logic and transforming those consumers into like symbols of the space, you know. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope it does.
The thing is that if like architecture is not functional for the use, is it really architecture? That's the question.
Good question. Again, it's hard to answer good questions. I don't know. Yeah, you could write a PhD on that. Of course, architecture has to be functional. Otherwise, it's just art. So, yeah, I guess that's my answer. I don't know what to say more than that.
Yo creo que con esa respuesta y con esas excelentes preguntas de verdad que hemos recibido de parte de los estudiantes, vamos a darle un súper aplauso a Cristian y a todos ustedes por estar aquí y por ser parte de esta dinámica.
Momento, espera. No termina, Melissa, que no se vayan.
Ya, eso era pasar.
Bien, muchísimas gracias a Cristian. Yo creo que se merece un fuerte aplauso de parte de todos nosotros. Gracias por acercarnos. Gracias al profesor José Enrique Profesor, bienvenido, profe Magali, por acompañarnos esta mañana. Y les queremos pedir a todos, primero, una cosa, que en orden subamos al escenario para hacernos una foto bien chula con Cris. Y necesito 3 voluntarios para sostener las letras. ¿Ok? 1, 2, 3, perfecto. Entonces vamos a subir de manera organizada. Segundo, recordarles que esta noche a las 6 de la tarde es la gala de identidad cultural. Los chicos que están de turismo también están invitados a esa gala, así que si pueden venir. Y una última cosa, mis chicas de diseño 2, Natalia, ¿quiénes tengo de diseño 2? Levanten la mano, porfa. Recuerden que mañana nos vemos a las 10 en la 701, ¿de acuerdo? Que no teníamos definido el espacio. 701 a las 10, con sus modelos y con la presentación que tenemos preparada.